Welcome to the 4Q podcast. My name is Sheena Shuey. I'm a therapist who specializes in anxiety, burnout, and relationship issues, and truthfully, all the underlying stuff that brings that forward. I'm also a business coach. So in this podcast, we talk all things life, business, love, relationships, and everything in between. So let's get into today's episode. Oh, Jackson, I am so excited to have you here. So for those listening, welcome back to another episode of the 4Q podcast. My name is Sheena Shuey, and today I have a really special guest with me. I'm so excited to get into this podcast episode because when therapists get together, you know, the birds of a feather flock together thing, we are just in our own little bubble, in our own little world. We just get it, and it feels very good. And I'm sure anyone listening, when you get with someone in your industry who just gets it, oh, it just feels like the stars align. So I'm really excited to speak with Jackson today. So as usual, whether you're new here or a seasoned pro who's been on the 4Q podcast for a while, whenever we have a guest on, we follow my 4R formula that I use in all my coaching programs, which goes reflect, redefine, redesign, and realign. And what that is we're going to reflect on who Jackson is. He's going to tell us a bit about himself. But what we do is we talk about redefining life, redefining moments. We do this in our programs. We redefine a couple of key things so that you can redesign your life to make it better. And then the realigning part is, how do I stay with this? Now that I've gone through this process, I'm really on the right track. How do I stay there? Because inevitably shit comes up, things come up, and we need to address that. So no more from me. I want to take over to Jackson. So Jackson, let's start off with the reflect piece. So can you introduce everyone to you who doesn't know you and tell us a bit about yourself?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm just looking at your home. It looks so nice. You got a nice mirror, you got some nice plants. It's definitely nice to come, making me feel calm already before we get into it. So I am Jackson Goding. I run a clinic in Sydney, in Crow's Nest, called Fine Reason Therapy. And I am a clinical counsellor and psychotherapist. And I love to sort of spend a lot of time with my friends. I love eating. Do a lot of that. I love cooking. And yeah, I guess I'm pretty informal, pretty laid back, pretty chill. As we kind of said, we do bounce off each other. I think the part of that is you literally have authenticity written on your shirt. I kind of go about authenticity is sort of the way I show up, and that's how I want to be. So yeah, I guess I try to wear my heart on my sleeve and protect myself at the same time, but then also be very kind of real and honest, and that serves some people and not others, and that's the way it goes.
You know what I love? I've really loved how therapists are actually showing up as themselves basically since COVID, I feel. You know, so pre-2020, I feel like a lot of us still had this conditioning that we had to show up like, you know, tight shirt, very conservative, you know, hold back on who we are. And then COVID happened and a TikTok explosion happened, and therapists were actually showing up as themselves and showing up with their tattoos and showing up with their piercings and showing up with, hey, I'm a therapist who has borderline, or hey, I'm a therapist and I also have depression, and this is how, you know, I think something happened where we broke the mold. And what I love is that for you and I feel like we really show up with our authentic selves, and Australian therapists, I think, still have a little bit to catch up on in that space, in that we're still very tight-lipped, a little bit tight, and, you know, everyone's going to have a different flavor, and that's what I love, is that, and people are just going to gravitate towards you. I mean, I already do gravitate towards you, because anyone who shows up fully as themselves, you can feel that. You know, I think when you go to a networking event and people are just like dressed how they want to dress, be who they want to be, there's something about, you feel safe around that. Whereas when you're with someone and they're guarded, or you
Yeah.
feel like they're hiding something, it almost creates anxiety in you because there's something hidden there, right?
Yeah, well, you're just not sure. I get that completely. And you know what? They're also my favorite people to treat. Because they're like, well, what's the mask about, you know? So I love that sort of thing on the other hand as well. But I guess, yeah, you're kind of right. Because the way my kind of training happened, and I'm sure it's similar to you, I studied psychology, which really wasn't for me. But it was sort of my underpinning, which really kind of that and my counseling, I guess, both were don't disclose, don't self-disclose, don't share too much about you. You're there for the client and only ever do that if it's absolutely necessary. Then I got a job at a South Pacific Private, which is down in Curl in Sydney, which is probably our leading trauma treatment center, which is an American model that is a bit more advanced in the way that we do trauma therapy in Australia. So we went in there, and the first thing that you do, therapist or client, is you check in. You say, how are you feeling right now? What are you in recovery for? As well. And that for me was like, oh, I got all these therapists saying I'm in recovery for drinking. I'm in recovery for depression,
Wow.
anxiety. And I knew what I was in recovery for at the time. So it just was like, all right, yeah, why don't I say that sort of thing? And then I think from there, like, really, that model was like a vortex. So your shit's coming out, whether you like it or not. So you either grasp it and model it and show a way of doing it in a healthy way to help clients, or you keep pretending. And then that's really, like you said, not going to serve people at all because they go, well, I don't feel that safe with you. So yeah, that really shifted and shaped the way that I kind of was like, well, this is me, everyone else is taken. I got to choose me, I guess. So, yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was very blessed, and I think, for those following, and you might have been following me for a while, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in synchronicities, and I think things happen the way they're supposed to, even though it doesn't feel like it at the time. And I remember when I graduated from my master's of counseling, so I did my undergrad in psych and then I did my counseling too. Same thing is that my psychology was very much, you know, same thing you said, don't disclose anything about yourself unless it's absolutely necessary to the process or someone really isn't opening up. But my very first job after a master's of counseling was counseling kids in the child protection system. So I was kids, youth, trauma to the nines, right? There ain't no way you are working with a kid like that without being like, here's my shit as well, because they are so guarded and they don't trust anyone and they're sus on you. They're like, BITCH, who do you think you are coming up in here? You want to talk to me? And it's like, okay, I'll keep it real with you, and I'm so lucky because I really actually didn't want to work with kids when I first started because I hadn't really had much experience with kids, to be honest. And I was like, you're throwing me in with not just kids, but kids who have been through some stuff, right? And I was very overwhelmed. But everything I do with those kids and those teenagers works even more effectively with adults, I find. The self-disclosure, the like, I get it and I've been there too. And again, not too much. You don't want to make it about yourself, right? But I think it was Erwin Shalom. I think that's his name. It's the author of the what's the book? It's like helping others, or there's some book. I'll have to check and I'll put it in the show notes. But they talk about this sort of spectrum of disclosure, but basically you want to be a fellow traveler. So not sharing too much, not sharing not enough, but sort of going, oh, you have a dog, I have a dog, and something that happens with me and my dog is this and this and this, right? Because I think one end of the spectrum is not saying, oh, look, if they find out I have a dog, will they go to my dog park? And what if we run into each other? And like, I think some people get really caught up in that. And then on the other end, making the whole session about your dog, right? Like, and the person's paying you for their time, So, so I think that's really important. And I really appreciate that there's been a lot of breaking the mold and showing up as ourselves, which leads us really nicely for me to ask you around, you know, we all go through this process of some really big redefining moments that make us who we are. And so I'd love to know, for you and your journey, is there any sort of key redefining moments we're going to talk about today? What's your big redefining moment?
It's definitely a few. I mean, I've been gifted with many. Like, I call them gifts wrapped in shit. Um, because they're hard lessons, right? And ones I wasn't willing to hear at the time, and probably took me a long time to actually accept. But the biggest one, which I guess has taken me on the biggest journey of where I am today, is I guess I'll start by sort of saying, the first time I ever went into therapy, I was I was in a really, really negative, toxic relationship, on both parts, on both sides. And the whole reason of going in, I was like, I want the tools to be able to support my girlfriend. She's not doing well. She needs me, and I need to get better at being able to help her. And at the time, I had this male therapist, nice guy, pretty, he was German, so it was very right, quite direct. And he was like, "You're not here for that. You're here for you." And I just couldn't accept it. I refused to believe there was anything wrong with me. And pretty much ditched him. I almost reported him for that. But little did I know, right? And then it wasn't until, well, actually, that's not fair. There was a lot of different elements that kind of got me more and more ready, mostly because of lots of different breakdowns in myself. But it wasn't until then I got into a really, really good therapist and I was more ready within myself, where he said, "Why are you a therapist?" And I sort of said, "Well, I've always wanted to help people." And he goes, "Well, no, 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 no. Like, yeah, like, I get it. Well, why are you actually here? Like, why are you actually a therapist?" And then he shared why he was. And he said, my mom was an addict and my dad left. And I needed to fix my mom and save my mom. And now I'm a therapist.
Mm.
And I go, ah. So he goes, I got into this space because I was conditioned through my own core beliefs that I needed to start uh, being there for other people. So then naturally, my skill set became being able to support others, being able to help others. On top of that was being able to feel a sense of worth and purpose from it, and being reliant on whether this goes well or not well to determine whether or not I'm enough or that I matter. So when he said that, I just broke down, because immediately I was like, oh, I think for me, I've
Mm.
been through a lot of relationships, and it probably wasn't until like quite at a really suicidal, depressed, anxious, pretty much mapping and mirroring all of her shit became my shit became her shit. It was just very, very explosive, very enmeshed, very codependent. And I'll get to that in a sec. But I guess the thing that relationship or the therapy kind of taught me was that it wasn't just about then, and it was about why would I stay, and why am I here, and what makes me want to keep coming back to this sort of level of insecurity or toxicity or whatever. And it
Mm.
was, yeah, this was older. This was much, much older. And I think for me, that was divorced very young and probably emotionally unavailable parents that, not by their own design or fault. It was more that there just wasn't the needs that I needed to be met. And then I needed to be loved. So I became everyone's best friend. I became everyone's like go-to person. And naturally, I got really good at it, because in my eyes, I didn't understand this growing up or in my relationships early on, is that my worth was dependent on it. If
Mm-hmm.
I didn't fix you, save you, support you, care for you, please you, love you, then you might not love me, and therefore I'm not lovable, and I'm not worthy, and I'm not good enough. And that became, this like unspoken, unwritten rule of life, is that my worth was based on others, and and I would sacrifice myself in order to make sure everybody else could be okay, because inevitably that meant that I was worthy. So
Mm.
that in therapy, on top of all the revelations that kind of continued to be gifted upon me, was
Yeah.
was my kind of redefining moment, is really understanding that if you don't do something about this, you'll die, because relationships aren't going to be perfect, and I'm not going to be able to get my worth from someone else forever. It's not possible. I'm going to eventually be so broken by the sacrifice of myself in order to go and do that, which was
Yeah.
very, very inauthentic. And at the time I thought, like, why isn't this working? I'm loving you, I'm supporting you, I'm caring for you, I'm pleasing you, I'm doing every single little thing. Why do I still feel empty? Why do I still feel I need to go and do it in other ways with other people, or go and study it or whatever? Like, why wasn't I just feeling
Mm.
good enough within? And yeah, it was the breakdown and understanding of that, which took a really long time to grasp. And to be honest, will always be something that I'm trying to rebalance and recenter, and try and stay in alignment with, because I guess my go-to for many more years than not was to serve others in order to feel good.
Yeah.
Uh, so that was really the biggest redefining moment, was that my the kind of way I describe codependency is, if someone is cold, let's say, I love you dearly, and I want to look after you and protect you, and be in a relationship with you, and you're cold. Naturally, someone might say, yeah, I'll give you my jacket, or they might say, go and put your jacket on. Whereas a codependent person will say, I will light myself on fire and come and sit next to you and keep you warm.
Yeah.
And that was me. I would be lighting myself on fire all the time, going to sit next to everyone, and then they'd be good, they'd be warm, and I'd be like, no, you're not just getting your jacket, you're getting the bloody real deal. You're getting fire right next to you. So eventually that burns you out. Eventually that creates resentment, depression, anxiety. There's just all this ongoing
Yeah.
burning thing inside you that slowly will break you down. But at the time, in the sickness of it all, in the addiction, is
Mm.
it still is better as long as you feel worthy. So that, in a long, big, wide shaped nutshell with way more things inside, is me in my life, and the thing that made me go, I need to find out, how do I love me? How do I be worthy within myself? Because if I don't, I'm in a lot of trouble, as
Yeah.
it showed. It really did.
Yeah.
Way.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for sharing that, because I think there's so many parts of that that I think are really powerful. I think one, so many of the listeners who are going to be listening can relate to that, right? I love that quote of, yeah, setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm, right? I think that's just such a beautiful, way to describe a somewhat toxic behavior, right? And I think a lot of us are conditioned to be that way, right? And I've had to catch myself even as a parent, right? Because when your kids are little and you're always like, if a kid wants another toy that you're playing with, it's like, oh, share. And it's actually like, you know what? You were here first. It is okay that you have the first go of the toy and they can wait their turn to share, right? Like, it's just all these little things that can really contribute to that codependency stuff of like, I've just got to give. If I give everything to people, it'll keep them happy. And if they're happy, then I'm safe. And then if they're safe, I'm worthy. And this whole toxic thing. So there's that. But I think as well, what's really interesting, again, as therapists, I just laugh because so for my 100th episode, I shared my story. And my redefining moment was going to therapy as well. But same thing, the first time I went, I didn't think it was for what I was going for. So when I went to therapy, I actually had, in that role I talked about, that external, so counseling kids in the child protection system, as you can imagine, I was in the weeds. I was hearing some really big stuff. I was not getting good supervision at my workplace. And I was throwing my heart and soul into this thing. So it was awful. So I ended up getting external supervision thinking, oh, we're just going to talk about work, only for it to turn out to be therapy for myself, and realizing all these things about myself, and you know, realizing the trauma that I had been through, right? It's incredible how many of us, the wounded healers, we work with trauma, we help trauma, we know everything about trauma, yet we can't see our own trauma sometimes. There was a psychologist, Ingrid Clayton. She's like the PTSD, really big in the States. And she talked about, she went through 3 degrees and did trauma day in, day out, and didn't really realize she had gone through so much trauma. And that's the power of therapy, is they can see things in you that you cannot see, but we don't explicitly say it, right? Like there's an art to, you got to make that conclusion. I can't make it for you. I'm just going to help do some exercises to bring that out of you, but eventually you're going to get to that. And it sounds like that journey you went through, like all those bits and pieces of, I realized it was this happened in my parenting, and it realized that I was doing this for others, and I realized that it came to worthiness, right? Can you tell us, like, just break down a little bit more on, like, what is, for someone who maybe hasn't really gone to therapy that much, or has been scared of working with the therapist, or same thing as we both experienced, maybe they dabbled but they weren't quite ready, or they're like, oh, I don't know, or I'll go for 2 sessions, or I didn't really get too much out of 2 sessions, right? Like I didn't go back because I wasn't fixed, quote unquote, after 3 sessions, whatever. Can you explain a bit about what that looks like, and how you get kind of epiphany after epiphany? Can you describe that a little bit more as a therapist, but also someone who's been in therapy?
Mhm. Yeah, I can certainly try and share my kind of view on it. But I think that there's there's this there's this space that kind of happens where people want to know, but people are also afraid to know, and then people have then gone and read about it, and then I guess get to maybe an awareness component, which we can't, like, the lights are off until you got awareness. Awareness is 100% the light, right? But then it's just light, right? It lights up this room that now you go, holy shit, look at all this stuff in this room. And then you go, well, I'm not going to do anything with it because I just have the awareness. All I did was turn a light on, which is so powerful, but then daunting, because then you start to know. I had a client once working with corrections clients and people going in and out of jail and trying not to go back into jail. And I was running groups, and the way that he described awareness, he's like, Jackson, it's now like I've got this, it's like I'm in a two-way mirror being interviewed, and I'm on the outside watching myself on the inside, trying not, and he's sitting there going, I know this, I know I shouldn't say what I'm about to say. And then awareness is him knocking on the glass, being like, don't say it. We know this. Don't say it, don't say it, don't say it. And then he'll go out and blurt and say it. So awareness means that now I just know the dumb shit that I keep doing, or the difficult pain that I keep experiencing, or the moments of I guess anxiety that get happen when I get this trigger. It's all now I just know, and then I keep doing it, right? Or I know, and then now it's so painful knowing. So awareness has gotten us to this point where a lot of people can read in a book, can do in a couple of questionnaires, can maybe even just listen to these podcasts and start to break down cognitive ability, thought-based learning, to go, oh yeah, there must be some stuff. And I guess that is one part of it, and a really important part, starting to get an idea, and maybe that's where people are at. That's what people are ready for. And I guess that is really just getting curious about it and reflecting on what it is that keeps happening that's getting in your way now, or understanding that the feedback that you're getting, that you're either listening to or not willing to listen to, he's trying to tell you something. The people that are around you can notice, and they're trying to tell you something. So I guess that had to happen a few times for me. I just I get it, and then I kept going back. So it's really just being able to have enough space for myself to recognize that there are repeated patterns, and this is how they start, and this is when they reconnect and start going again. And if there's no time in, you're not going to do it. Simple as that. Like if you don't have the time to space to kind of look after you, then you're not going to look after you until you give yourself the time to do that. And that's the same with reflecting. I guess from there, it's about jumping into, I now can think about it. How do I feel about it? I want to get out of my head and into my heart, into my body, and actually start to go, that was painful. My mom wasn't meeting my needs. My dad wasn't meeting my needs. I keep going back to abusive relationship. That there's a little boy in me that's like, just needs this self-soothing love and reparenting that I've been so not willing to do. Instead, I was like feeding him drugs or, taking him out partying or, avoiding everything to abandon him again. Right. So it was once I was ready to kind of go back and sort of say, hey, I'm going to have to sit with you for a while because you're too vulnerable. You're too scared to move forward. So I think there's a big element of that, but I guess that's one big complex way of explaining it. And I guess a very short way of explaining it is how everything that we do or that is happening is based on our experience. It's based on what we've seen, what we've heard, what we've learned, what's been imprinted and stuck, is based all the way back. So when I get in a relationship and I don't like certain tones, or when I start sort of experiencing this thing with my crying, dysfunctional, hard to deal with kid that I've just had, and I can't handle it as well. That's old, so if it's cyclical, it's historical kind of, right? So really being able to look at our experiences shape the way that we see the world. And if that's the case, then what were my experiences? And I'm willing to get curious to find out a little bit more about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you've described that, where it's very much like, first step is awareness. Awareness that something's going on. Second thing you mentioned is reflecting. Okay, so now that I know that this might be my attachment style, this might be my love language, this might be my trauma response, this might be ADHD, this might be complex trauma, whatever it is, whatever thing you've stumbled upon. A lot of people stumble upon this on the internet, right? First you have awareness, then you've got that reflection piece. Like you say, it's like, okay, now that I'm aware, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff I haven't been dealing with. And then the third part is going like, okay, now I have to feel this and feel this in my body. But I think what's really a great analogy feeding off what you're saying, and I think this is really important, is that everyone will benefit from therapy. Like, I really do believe it would be great if everyone in society went to a therapist. The world would be a better place, because I think with your analogy, what you were saying, it's like without awareness, you're in a dark room. Awareness turns on the light, but then as you said, it's like, oh my gosh, it's almost like walking into the most cluttered, disorganized, overwhelming room you've ever been in. And so sometimes when I create awareness for people, and you would have experienced this too in session, is where you point out something to someone and it's very overwhelming because you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to sort this out now? I didn't know this about myself. Is this doable? So it's almost like walking into a cluttered space, a cluttered, overwhelming room, and going, where do I even start? And I think that's the gift of working with the therapist. I think, can you sort through some of it yourself? Probably. Could you maybe create a system with bits and pieces that you find on the internet? Maybe. Or you could start with an organizing professional who's like, you know what? This looks overwhelming, but I have helped hundreds of people, thousands of people with the same, if not worse, room than this. And I can help you too. And we'll just start here. That is the gift of therapy, I think, because it's helping you deorganize, declutter this overwhelming space so that it feels calm, so that you can see when the mess is coming up again, so that when you see the clutter coming up again. I think that that's super powerful. So, and I know that you'd appreciate that. So going forward, you went to therapy, you found out kind of all these patterns in yourself, all this stuff about yourself. You found out why you became a therapist in the first place as well, unconsciously, right? The wounded healers that we are. Tell us about, how did you change the way you did life after that? Or what kind of things did you redesign in your own life now that you had this awareness and you had these things? You know, what kind of skills and support did you get?
I think the first thing was there was this like surrender that kind of had to happen. And anyone that's sort of experienced, letting go or grief or it's just like, I don't want it. I know whether it's denial, whether it's that's going to be too hard, whether it's like, this is what I know. This is what I'm really familiar with, even though it's hectic and traumatic and stressful. It's also the most familiar thing. So surrender was probably one of the biggest things, and probably admitting and willing that I was sort of powerless to it. If I'm not careful, my life becomes unmanageable. So I really had to drop into that. I think where it kind of moved into was like I just didn't quite get why me, who's this fun, bubbly, extroverted guy who says he's really authentic and is a big catch and everyone thinks he's amazing, that I just hated. I just didn't really like me. Like I think it didn't make any sense because I should, and that was the part that was so hard to sort of toy with. It's like, no, I'm fine and nothing's wrong. And I should just keep being me and it's probably them. That was really hard. So really, and you know what, that still is hard, because I like easy way out, and the hard way is hard, right? So I guess the path of least resistance was something that I kind of went down for a while, and the resistance pathways were the much more challenging, longer, treacherous path. So the big part was just I don't love me, so you need to put more time in to figure out how you're going to do that. And I just really kind of it was very radical. I wrote a book on, radical self-worth, pretty much, like how to radically put yourself first. And that's what I needed, which, some people are really scared of because it can be really selfish. And my big emphasis in therapy in here is you have to be selfish. You have to finally find a way to be able to do you. And we don't need to do that, as in we can never then look after anybody else. But there's a point, and when it's been so far gone, it has to come back in a full way. So I really started getting non-negotiable about the way I was doing me and what had to happen. Because if I was sacrificing myself again, it's like a drug. Like I go back down this path, and if I slip, I'm gonna relapse back into this, self-loathing sort of this shame-based place that again it's tricky to know I'm here again. So just like someone that's toying with not being sober and they're like, I can have a drink or two every now and then. It's like every now and again you have like that 3 or 4 drinks and you go, oh, and then I went for the 5th one with because I needed it. That's this like dangerous territory. So because it's relationships, you can't be abstinent for that. It's connection. We need it. We thrive on it. So my whole part was I need to connect back to me, and I need to be really authentic in that approach. And then naturally over time, which has taken a long time, is I got to the point where that's what is the best version of me to give out. The more I can do for me, the more I'm going to be able to show up for others. So I have to figure that part out. So I got very, very radical in that and really got non-negotiable about my self-care. And then, I've always wanted to work in trauma. And I guess then the more I found out about this sort of stuff, and the hospital I worked in, South Pacific Private, really helped concrete that for me. While I was a therapist, I was doing the work while I was there. And that made me realize like there's trauma, and, I treat a lot of that. I'm a complex trauma therapist. And my whole view is no matter what we kind of show up with, it all comes back to how we feel about ourselves and how we show up in relationships. And I think that anyone, as you sort of said, everyone has some sort of clutter, and that has an impact on the way they see them and the way that they show up, which means there's work to do. So I now help people understand that by going, I'm I don't have this like overt traumatic experience. I had needs that weren't met that any other person would be like, that's not trauma or whatever. Like, but they're still less than nurturing experiences. They still left me with needs that weren't met that started to shape the way I did things, that actually created more consequences. Because I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the
Mm.
teachings. You can't teach what you don't know, and that kind of shaped the way I am. So that is something that I really preach. The same with you. I want everyone to be in therapy because I want everyone to realize that when they turn the light on, there is still a few boxes around, right? There is still
Yeah.
some there, and that's my big emphasis, is really kind of now spreading this word of connection is the way, and that's what's going to help us heal. But we do that within, so that then we can give it back out as well. And that be the idea that let's look at our experiences, let's look at what's happened, and then we can get more and more of an idea of how do I come back to being my true authentic self, and then look after the parts of me that have these little sore spots, pain points, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's where
Yeah.
it's kind of got to. And that's a daily practice. And the best part about my job, which is selfish, is I get to be accountable. I hold myself accountable because I preach and then I teach, so I gotta then put back in the work. I'm no good
Yeah.
to anybody unless I do things for me. So I go, don't call me past 6. This is when I'm gonna go and do my rest so that I can come back and do this again tomorrow. I have to be able to radically show that I'm gonna keep filling up my cup,
Yeah.
because a lot of stuff that's depleting me, I gotta keep energized.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a couple of things that I think that you touched on there, which I just want to break down before we sort of get some final points and wrap up. But I think something that you sort of mentioned was like, oh, perhaps I shouldn't feel this way because my trauma is not as bad as others, And I think that that's a really dangerous game that a lot of people play of, I want to go to therapy or I want to go to a therapist. Oh, but has my life really been that bad? And it's like, if you're even questioning it, you should go. If you don't feel good, you should go. If you want personal development on any means, you should go, because I
Yeah.
think, how invalidating is it? Like, imagine you're walking through the desert and it's really hard and you're really thirsty and you're really hot, and you turn over to your mate and go, you know what? We've been walking in the desert for 3 days, and oh my gosh, I'm burnt. It's hot. I don't know how much I can do this. And they're like, well, imagine if you had no legs. Just be grateful that you have legs and two eyes and two arms. It's like, okay, yeah, I'll keep going. And it's like, dude, like, I'm struggling here. Can you just acknowledge my struggle? Because it's relative to me. And I think that's the thing, is that I think a lot of people fall into that of, we see, I don't watch the news that much, but I know that when you watch the news, there is that feeling of, what have I got to complain about when people are going through this or people are going through that? And it's like, but actually, if you keep ignoring those feelings, it's going to build up even bigger and even bigger, like that rolling stone gathers moss. All the feelings you've been ignoring, they build up if you don't let them out, like with some sort of self-worth, some release. And so I guess coming back to our final point, the realignment, you mentioned that self-worth is like the major focus, right? That was the thing that once you got that awareness, once you did your reflection, you're like, okay, self-worth is the thing. What are the actual things, like actual things that you do sort of day to day, week to week, or even month to month, like actual actionable things that you do or that you'd recommend to others to really put that self-worth first? And also, secondly to that, how do you do it with, like, how do you reframe selfishness? Because I think that too, we need to put ourselves first, and it's not selfish in the traditional form. And even if it is, you cannot give from an unselfish place. Can you just sort of break down, what do you do for self-worth, and then how do you feel okay about it, like you're not being quote unquote like super selfish?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Look, I mean, it's a very big space to, I'm sure I mean, literally, that's what I do. I talk about it all day, every day. So
If we
it,
could get 3 dot points, if we get the
I,
3 dot point
yeah,
version before we finish up, what would be the
yeah.
3 dot points?
Look, I mean, I think for me, it was definitely kind of being able to have uh the ability to kind of do the work, right? And kind of whatever that looked like, whether that be doing some group work, doing some some therapy, or just being able to kind of be amongst people that have done it, or reading books that kind of have done it. Like that's definitely what helped me be in that space to kind of get the ball rolling, rather than being in my environment that wasn't sort of serving me, or kind of keeping me kind of out of
Yeah.
alignment, right? Then
Yeah.
I guess it's like, really figuring out, and I've mentioned before, and I do have a little program that's free for anyone that's interested. It's a non-negotiable self-care. So figuring out what your top 6 things are that you want to do for yourself, that you have to do. The reason it's non-negotiable is because when you don't have it, you notice. So you have to
Yes.
put stuff on there to be able to keep showing up for you. So the more that you do that, every single thing that you do. So for example, I went for a nice, beautiful walk this morning. I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow morning. I'm going to go to the beach probably on Wednesday morning. And then every time I do that self-care activity, right, that's already good. But when I look at it as, when I do this thing for me, I am proving that I am worthy. I'm proving that I'm good enough. And that's just, no one else is involved in that. That's me looking after me, which means that I'm going against this negative loop that comes back in that says, hey, remember, we've had a lot of experiences where no one loves you at all and you're a piece of shit. So I have a lot more, I look at it like David and Goliath, right? It's sort of like David is not stepped inside a gym, and Goliath is ginormous, right? So if that's my shame and that's my self-worth issues, he's ready to go. He'll knock David out 9 times out of 10. So David's got to start getting into the gym. David's started building this mental muscle that's starting to realize, hey, I can be compassionate. I can give you some self-love. I can raise your awareness, and I can get you really, really healthy and really, really strong. So at least you're able to challenge Goliath. Because for
Mm.
the time, no one's challenging Goliath at all. Like,
Yeah.
which means that he's going to keep showing up and keep winning, right? So
Yeah.
it's being able to find even just something that I go, that's what's challenging this idea that I've believed for a long time. This core belief is that I am not good enough. Well, it's like David showing up and doing a little bit for him actually goes against that message. So I'm really
Yeah.
sort of being able to go, well, how could that be true? And then I
Yeah.
guess the last thing is being able to have deep compassion for yourself, and finding that, wherever this may start, is that it's figuring out maybe what age it started. So the core belief being, I'm not good enough. Like that's like 5-year-old Jackson, maybe 7-year-old Jackson, probably more accurate. But like, imagine a little 7-year-old thinking that they're not good enough to be existing in the world, and then what that 7-year-old might need. And because the only person that's going to do that for that 7-year-old, who's figuratively living inside of you, is you. So you need to figure out what that 7-year-old would have needed,
Yeah.
and then figure out, how do I do that whenever he's feeling vulnerable, is that 7-year-old is out to play again, scared and not safe. So
Yeah.
that's probably where I'll.
Yeah. I love that. So that final point for anybody listening as well is around, so how do you stay in alignment, or how do you actually implement self-worth, which I love, is, the 3 things you mentioned is, yeah, therapy. Just go to therapy. It's so powerful. And I think that's the thing, is like, as therapists, I can tell the difference between a therapist who's gone to therapy and someone who hasn't. And you want to make sure you got a therapist who's been to therapy. I mean, because yeah, it's just so powerful. So go into therapy, and you'll share it with us. I'll put it in the show notes. You mentioned there's this activity around your 6 non-negotiable self-care things that you do for yourself. And then having that deep compassion for yourself, and doing what the 7-year-old self would need. And I really love how I feel like that non-negotiable self-care is doing it for your 7-year-old self in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like if the non-negotiable is going to the beach once a week or once a month, because that's one of my kind of habits as well for myself and the person I'm trying to be. And it's like the younger version of me, it's like I'm taking her out for the day. because a kid who sits at home all day, every day, isn't going to be stoked, isn't going to be happy. But imagine I'm taking her out. And I know that this is about out there for people who haven't done inner child work, but it's powerful. So I think those non-negotiables really help that third point of that deep compassion for yourself too.
Yeah, and that's the whole kicker of all of it, because as you start to break this down, someone needs to go, that would have been hard, that would have been scary, that's a lot, that's overwhelming. We need to be compassionate rather than, why aren't I getting this right? I've done all this work. It's like, no, anytime I come back to blame or shame or feeling like I'm stuck or not getting what I want, it's like, imagine doing that to a 5-year-old. Say, you're not doing it right. You're right. You aren't worthy. Let's go get you smashed drunk or whatever. Like, we've got to come back to compassion, and that's going to be a big ticket item to be able to find our way back to self-love, and then celebrating the times that we can do that. So I was really kind to myself today.
Oh,
Right.
that's so sweet. Oh, I love that. So, Jackson, thank you so much for coming on today. For anybody who wants to connect with you or find you or do that 6 non-negotiable self-care, that activity, where can they find you? Where can they do this? Let us know.
Sure. So the best and easiest and simplest way is Find Reason Therapy on my Instagram, which is just Find Reason Therapy. And that just has links to everything that we got going on at the moment. So podcast, lots of resources, lots of free stuff. A 6-week program on self-worth is coming out pretty soon. And then the non-negotiable self-care, which I think is the underpinning and fundamental part of all life. So yeah, you can find me on there, DM me on there. And that's the access to my website, booking, all that sort of stuff. So that's probably the go-to.
Incredible. Well, I really loved this episode. I loved having you on. Thank you for giving us your time, your energy, your grace, your wisdom. And again, I cannot wait to check out your podcast as well. And for anyone listening, go head over, find Jackson on Instagram. He's got some really awesome stuff. So thank you again. And for anyone listening, I will see you in the next episode of the 4Q podcast.
Thanks.